Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. It is a pleasure to welcome back Ian Millhiser, although I wish it was in more pleasurable circumstances. Ian is the senior correspondent at Vox. And maybe more importantly for folks, author of Injustices, the Supreme Court's history of comforting the comfortable and afflicting the afflicted. And in 21, The Agenda, how Republican Supreme Court is reshaping America. Ian, I mean, you and I have been having conversations for at least a decade. I remember talking to you about your first book in 2015, I think it was.
Yeah, no, it's been a while.
And leading indicator, I would say, both your books in many respects of what to expect. And now it sort of feels like we're here. And I don't know whether we should start with the immunity or the Chevron. Maybe we start with the Chevron so that we can sort of ramp our way up into the sort of like a dissolution of some of the sort of, I don't know, things we've come to understand about the country. But we have also been talking for 5 or 6 years at least of the Chevron doctrine. You have been saying they are coming for this. They're going to do it. It's just a matter of when they have the right case and the right number of votes. Just remind people what the Chevron Deference Doctrine is, or I guess now was.
So let's take a step back, I think, and discuss both of the big cases that you mentioned, because I'm trying to figure out in my own head how to reconcile them. So Chevron is a doctrine which says that for all the myriad range of issues that Congress has told a federal agency to figure out, and that could be anything from how power plants should reduce their emissions, to who gets overtime pay, to in some parts of the country, what you pay your cable company. I mean, just all scads of policy questions fall under the Chevron doctrine. The Chevron doctrine, which was overruled, said that generally courts are supposed to stay out of those sorts of policy decisions. Congress gave this power to the agency and not to the courts. And so we should have the federal agencies decide these questions. So that's one major decision that we got from the Supreme Court in the last several days. The other, of course, is the decision appointing Donald Trump as imperator and consular perpetual of the Empire of the United States. And I mean, I don't understand the value system in place, which says that we need to be absolutely terrified that Joe Biden might overreach and use his power to forgive some student loans, or to impose some needlessly burdensome regulations on a power plant that's emitting all sorts of pollution. You know, we got to be extraordinarily vigilant and make sure that the government doesn't overreach that way. But if Trump comes back into office and he orders the U.S. military to assassinate a rival, that's not really a concern. I just don't understand the value system at play in a court that can be hyper cautious about any exercise of governmental power in every context except the most frightening context imaginable.
Can I give a thematic through line that I'll just float out to you, Ian? In Chevron and in this Trump case, it empowers the judiciary. It empowers the court. Right now, for all of these regulations, you got to go through the court system as opposed to having the agencies have this deference. And then with Trump, they didn't really constitute what an official and an unofficial act is. For the most part, it could be an ad hoc situation, which again empowers the courts to make those determinations based on what has become obvious to people are nakedly political and partisan lines.
Yeah, I mean, it is certainly true that these courts want to concentrate as much power within themselves as possible. I mean, that's what overruling Chevron is about. It's about taking all of these issues in which executive branch agencies that are accountable to an elected president who can get voted out of office, taking all of that power away from them and giving the final word to unelected judges. That's absolutely what the Chevron cases were about. But I think the Trump immunity cases give us more certainty than, I mean, Roberts had all this hedging language in his opinion where he acted, well, there's this immunity, but it's only a presumption, and we're not, he was pretty clear that this is really broad immunity. So what he said in that opinion is he said three things. The first thing he said is that there's one bucket of instances where the Constitution gives the president a certain power. So the Constitution gives the president the power to issue pardons. And so the president can never, ever be charged with the crime or have any limitation placed on his ability to issue a pardon. And, you could take that as seriously as you want until you realize that one of the powers that the Constitution also explicitly gives the president is the commander-in-chief power. So that's why, it seems pretty clear that Roberts said that the president can order the military to assassinate his rivals, because if the president's actions cannot be contested when he uses an explicit constitutional authority, commander-in-chief power is right in there.
All right, so I just want to make this explicit for people to understand. Like, that is sort of like of the three parts of this of Robert's theory. That is the one that is sort of like ironclad. Like, there's just no questioning of that. And Ketanji Brown Jackson made the point of like, well, the president has the authority to fire. I think it was the attorney general, but he can't go in there and shoot him.
Right.
Right. Like, he can't, like, it's not like, he can get rid of the attorney general, but he has to do it within the constructs of our laws. You
Right.
can't murder. So, but according to Roberts, if someone says to the president, I'm going to give you $1 million the day after you become president, or the day after you leave the president, or I'm just going to put it in your bank account now for a pardon, that sounds like you're okay if you're the president.
So that arguably fits into a third box. So, the area where the court said that the president has the least amount of immunity is unofficial acts. And so the question is, what is an unofficial act? And they seem to indicate that even though issuing the pardon is an official act, like taking the bribe potentially is an unofficial act. So maybe he could be prosecuted for that.
But isn't a bribe a quid pro quo? If the quid is okay,
right,
then the quo is irrelevant because it's not even related to the quid.
Well, what the court said, and this is why I'm not sure that a president could even be prosecuted for taking a bribe, is what the court said is it said, yes, like maybe you could prosecute him for bribe taking. I don't know. They weren't really clear about that. But they also said you can't admit as evidence into the criminal proceeding any of the stuff that he did as an official act. So like the way that a bribery prosecution works is you have to prove motive. You have to prove not just that someone gave the president a gift, but that someone gave the president something in return for something else, the quid pro quo. And if you can't admit any evidence that if you're talking about the scenario where someone gives the president $1 million to pardon them, if you can't admit any evidence that he pardoned someone because that's an official act, I don't see how prosecutors can prove their case because they can't show that the president acted with the improper motive that the prosecution needs to prove.
And in fact, I mean, that's going to have relevance to Trump's New York conviction in a moment. But let's get there. I didn't mean to take you off track. So the first sort of bucket for Roberts is that you have this sort of like official act that is mentioned by the Constitution, is sort of like in this zone of no questioning whatsoever, and
right.
and gives you almost like this sort of like a transcendent immunity. The second conclusion is about presumptive immunity, not like hard fast under all circumstances, but one that's like the benefit of the doubt goes to the president.
Right. So there is the second box involves cases where the president does something that's within his official duties, but isn't specifically mentioned in the Constitution. And what the court said there is that the president is presumptively immune from prosecution. And then it said that the government has to clear an extraordinarily high bar. It said that the government has to show that essentially there's no way that prosecuting the president under these circumstances could do any damage to the executive branch. Now, I don't know what that means. And notably, the court didn't give any examples in its opinion of something that would clear that bar. It did give several examples of things that it suggested would not clear that bar. And one example it gave of something that almost certainly does not clear that bar is that the president sat down with high-ranking Justice Department officials, including the acting attorney general, and basically tried to enlist them in his effort to overthrow the 2020 election. And the question is, can Trump be prosecuted for having a conversation with a cabinet level official and various subordinates of the Justice Department? And the Supreme Court said, not only did it say no, 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 it said deciding what the Justice Department should do and who can be prosecuted by the Department of Justice is quintessentially an executive power that is vested in the president. So the court has not just said, potentially that the president can use his commander-in-chief power to do whatever he wants. It said that if the president wants to order DOJ to have his enemies arrested, that also fits within this official acts rubric where there's an extraordinarily strong presumption that the president can do whatever he wants and he is immune from prosecution.
I grew up with stories about how Nixon wanted to use the IRS to go after his enemies. And all that time, it was told to me in a way that this is an illegal thing to do. Yeah. But it turns out whoever told me that over the years was wrong, because it sounds to me like if Trump can say to the DOJ, go after this, what's to stop him to go to the IRS and say, okay, I want you not just to audit, but, I want constant harassment of these 5 people.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And in fact, if this Supreme Court had sat during the Nixon administration, Nixon would have served out his second term. The criminal act that Nixon was eventually implicated in is that he was caught on tape. I mean, he wasn't caught on tape. He recorded every conversation that happened in the White House. But there was a recorded conversation of him telling his senior advisors, hey, lean on the intelligence community and get them to cover up this whole Watergate thing. And that was the criminal act. It was him telling his senior advisors, hey, go take care of this. And the Supreme Court was quite clear in its opinion that, it discussed this in the context of whether or not President Trump's conversations with Mike Pence can be brought into a criminal prosecution. They seemed to say no. And one of the reasons they gave was, well, the vice president is often one of the top advisors to the president, and the president has to be able to speak freely with his advisors. So if the president now can't be prosecuted for any conversation he has with his advisors, that means that Nixon did not commit a crime. If the president does it, it is not illegal.
And to be clear, when we say he can't be convicted for having a conversation, it's not so much that he would be convicted for having a conversation. It's that the conversation is in pursuit of something that, if he wasn't president, would be illegal.
Right. If I call up a hitman and I say, hey, I want you to go shoot my wife, I'm not just having a conversation with that hitman. There's a crime being committed there. And what the Supreme Court seems to have said is that rule no longer applies to the city.
As long as that person works in the U.S. government, right, the president can do that.
As long as the hitman's a cabinet official.
Exactly. If the cabinet, if the hitman is some sort of third-party contractor, no. But if the hitman, if he goes to a
unless he's contracted by the U.S. government.
Right, exactly. Or there might be questions about chain of command here, but if Trump goes to one of his generals who it is part of his ordinary duties to speak to this general, and he says to this general, I want you to find a sniper and get this sniper to off Kamala Harris or, to off whatever Democrat Trump wants taken out. I mean, as I read the Supreme Court's decision, it said that that's not something that can be prosecuted.
And the sniper might be able to be convicted of committing a crime. However, it seems to me that certainly the president has the ability to pardon that person immediately, and there would be nothing. And that's the end of the whole story. I mean, basically, that guy might have a defense that, like, I was ordered to by my commander in chief. And the court may say, well, okay, extenuating circumstances, I guess. But what's amazing to me about this is that they say only in an official act, but there is no attempt. There's no, but like weighing of what constitutes an official act. There doesn't seem to be any guidelines as to what constitutes an official act. Like, and I mean, putting aside the fact that it seems to be absolutely no way to prove, right, whether something's official or unofficial, because any conversation he has with anybody who works with the government seems to be completely inadmissible. But how do they not even address what constitutes an official act or not?
I mean, they address it to a very limited extent, but they play this weird game where they almost wrote half a judicial opinion, where they announced this bizarre new standard, for the second box of cases where the president has presumptive immunity unless you can show there'd be some sort of like extraordinary danger to the executive branch if you don't prosecute him. They don't give any examples of what fits into that category. They give several examples of things that do not fit in that category, and they're things that the president does all the time. And like, if I am a prosecutor, what this opinion is saying to me is that if I want to bring charges against a sitting president, I am looking at years of litigation just to determine whether or not I'm allowed to bring these charges in the first place. And I mean, Donald Trump is 78 years old. In the unlikely event that like the courts allow this prosecution, or any prosecution against him, I mean, if he gets back into office and commits more crimes to move forward, he is going to be dead before he could possibly be tried to a conviction. He has no incentive to not do whatever he wants if he gets back into office.
Does this just kill Jack Smith's case? I mean, like, because of all the privileging of these conversations outside of what Giuliani, Sidney Powell, like, are they gonna? I mean, how this just cuts out a significant portion of the case that he'd been building.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of lawyers on Twitter and some of the legal blogs producing these elaborate charts laying out which parts of the case are still alive and which parts of the case aren't. My answer to you as a lawyer is that some parts could still potentially move forward while other parts are dead. But I think that, like, if you're analyzing this opinion like a lawyer trying to find the legal rule and assess like each stage of it, you're doing it wrong. What this court has done is it has strung out Donald Trump's trial, put the trial on hold for 7 months while it sat on this case. It then handed down this sweeping opinion it's going to take years of litigation just to figure out what parts of the case are still alive. And then you've got to hold a trial, which is only going to happen if Trump loses the election. And, God help us getting to that result where Joe Biden can't string 3 words together.
We just played 3 clips of Roberts, Alito, and Kavanaugh at their hearings, saying the words, "No one is above the law. The president is not above the law." Is there any way in which this ruling conforms with that statement? It seems to me those are completely at odds with each other.
Yeah, of course not. I mean, I was flabbergasted.
I mean, that's what like when I read your piece and you're like shocked, I'm like, this is one of the most jaded people I know about the court.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can find clips of me on cable news. I mean, I may have said it on your show. Like, there are all sorts of, I'm sure I wrote it on Vox, of me saying the Supreme Court is not going to say that Trump is allowed to do crimes before then going on to explain why, like, they've still already given Trump a major victory because they've delayed his trial for so long that it's not going to be possible to hold it until after the election. But surely these idiots aren't reckless enough to say that the president is allowed to just do whatever. And my God, like, it turns out they are much, much worse than I thought they were.
Could Joe, like, all right, so and now Joe Biden came out and announced last night that he's a really good guy. And he's going to be the last person on the ship who's going to believe in the integrity of the ship. And he is going to do it. He's going to bolt his feet to the ground and go to the bottom of the ocean with that ship, according to him. But could he, like, I mean, people have asked, like, well, why doesn't he just do student debt? Like, for instance, we just had courts gone back and forth. Various courts have gone back and forth on student debt. But, like, the pause on the LNG export facility.
Yeah.
He was just blocked from pausing. Why couldn't he say, like, no, and not only am I going to put pause on that, I'm also going to send some of our U.S. military, or let's just say federal marshals, because I don't want to get in the posse comitatus situation. And they're going to sit there, and anybody who goes and tries to apply for a permit, they're going to have to deal with these guys. Like, I mean, what's the... I know Biden wouldn't do that, but what's to stop him under this ruling from doing it?
I mean, probably nothing legal, except that at some point, maybe the service, maybe at some point the generals balk. But, like, what are we even doing here? Like, there's a lot of fantastic thinking on Twitter and other places. Like, oh, now that the Supreme Court has said that the president is a dictator, Joe Biden should act like a dictator.
Oh, I know, I'm just trying to give an example of, like, how broad what the ability, because if Donald Trump is there, right, it can work the other way. Like, I want you to take those catalytic converters off the cars.
Yeah.
Take them off right now.
Yeah. So, like, here's the thing. As a practical matter, like, once a president is in office, they can't be prosecuted. Only DOJ can bring a prosecution, and a federal prosecution. And DOJ has said that they think it's unconstitutional to prosecute the sitting president. So he gets 4 years once he's in office, where everyone agrees that nothing can be done to him. So let's say that, like, Trump is in office, and some judge rules against him on some matter, and Trump orders the military to have that judge killed. Okay, like, how does the process play out from here? Well, there would have to be an impeachment. If there's a Republican House, are you going to be able to get an impeachment vote through the U.S. House? And then the next question is, you need 67 senators to remove them. Now, we just had an impeachment process, and there goes my dog. He doesn't like any of this either.
I would imagine.
We just had an impeachment process where Donald Trump incited an angry mob to try to lynch the members of the United States Senate. And under the circumstances where Trump incited a mob to try to have senators killed, many of the senators who were in the barrel of that, who were facing down that mob, still voted not to convict him. So, like, if these guys are so lacking in political courage that they are unwilling to vote, that they are unwilling to vote for a conviction after their own lives were in danger, impeachment isn't going to work.
What's to stop let's say, there's an attempt to impeach Donald Trump, and let's say the Democrats control both houses, and Trump goes to his federal marshals and says, I don't want there to be a quorum today in the Senate. Go take 5 of those guys and keep them in the basement and don't let them go up and vote.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, that? I mean, Is that illegal?
I mean, it would be illegal for the marshals to do it, but I mean, now that Trump can't be prosecuted, I guess he could pardon the marshals. I mean, we are entering a world where the continued existence of American freedom depends upon U.S. officials who have the lawful right to carry a badge or a gun refusing an order from the president of the United States. And that's not a position you ever want to be in.
Well, if they're in the military, they have an obligation, not even marshals, say members of the military have an obligation to follow what their commander-in-chief is saying.
They take an oath to the Constitution.
Understood.
But it's also how the Constitution is being interpreted right now is I think, a little bit unclear as to whether the president...
But this set of circumstances that we're laying out here, that's just the textbook fascism. That's textbook.
I mean, it is certainly very frightening. I mean, like the one thing that distinguishes it from historical fascism is in historical fascism, you had institutions like the SS and the SA or the Black Shirts or other extra governmental militias whose purpose was to do violence on behalf of the ruling party or the party that inspired to rule.
The Proud Boys. For instance,
something like imagine the Proud Boys times 100. Like, imagine if there were armies of men wearing, I guess it's like yellow and black plaid is what the plaid boys wear. Like, imagine that when you walked out into the streets of any major city, there were parades of men in yellow and black flannels who you knew would beat the crap out of you if you stepped out in line with the ruling party. That's what historical fascism looks like. What the Supreme Court has set up is a situation where the people who would potentially be doing the beating up of dissenters or the arresting of dissenters or the killings of dissenters would be government employees. And there are rules that are supposed to say, whether you're a member of the military or otherwise, that you have to refuse an illegal order. But you have to ask yourself the question, how confident are you that if the president of the United States gives an illegal order, that there won't be anyone in the military or in any U.S. law enforcement agency that is willing to say yes?
And it's an official act now.
But that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Is there such a thing as an illegal order anymore from the president?
So, I mean, we're getting into hair splitting here, but like technically it is still illegal for the president to order someone to murder his rivals. It's just that the president probably can't be prosecuted.
Okay.
For it.
Okay. So he has immunity. The way that it's a phrase is he has immunity. It's illegal, but he has immunity. So it's not that the law has changed and given him ability. It's just that he's not subject to the law anymore, which is explicitly 180 degrees from what at least those three justices said during their confirmation hearings. And what we, this is like baby brain stuff. This is the stuff like, you tell your first grader, no one's above the law. Even the president has to follow the law. I mean, this is and that's not the case. We were all wrong when we told our first grader that, apparently.
No, this is... I mean, but my God, like I am not sure if this decision is a product of a sincere desire to bring about an American dictatorship, or if it is just a product of the sheer incompetence of this Supreme Court. And I'm actually inclined towards the latter view, because, if you look at, they don't know how to control their own docket. They don't know how to, they don't see around corners. They give themselves all kinds of power when they don't have the personnel to handle the power they're giving. Like, these guys are really bad at their job. And so I think it's entirely possible that these jokers have been living in a world of theory, where all they do is read law review articles written by members of the Federalist Society and they have lost their ability to think around, okay, if I say this thing, what are the natural consequences that flow from it? But this is a decision. I mean, again, like, I was wrong, but you can find probably dozens of examples of me saying before this came down, I do not think that the Supreme Court is going to say the president is above the law. Even these guys aren't that reckless.
I am inclined to agree with your assessment that this is incompetence, but it also, when you stop and think about that, the whole Federalist Society project and the way that they pump out these people and the people who end up being clerks there and the law schools they're going to and the professors that they're choosing to take in law school to set them up for these Federalist Society clerkships and whatnot, it is really devaluing. This is, so many of the things that we talk about these days just remind me of the bubble that some regional right-wing talk show host or even national one is in. They're in such a bubble. They've never been questioned. As soon as they get one question, it's like, I don't know. It's like, when Ben Shapiro had to say if we don't need the federal government to provide insurance for housing on the coast because you can just sell the house to somebody else, like the level of intellect, it's just, there's been no rigor in terms of questioning these things. With that said, they're following this agenda. I mean, to talk about the Chevron doctrine, this is in many ways, the Chevron doctrine, I think, is going to, on one half of it, it's like a Schoolhouse Rock type of situation. But the Chevron doctrine, in terms of the fabric of our society, this is the thing that's really going to rip it apart, it seems to me, because this makes it virtually impossible for Congress to empower agencies to protect consumers, citizens, investors. I mean, the list goes on, right? I mean, just remind us what the Chevron doctrine does, but where are we going to see this first, and how is this going to be implemented? Because it seems like you could have every corporation that has been inhibited by 80% of regulations, I would imagine. I mean, I don't know if anybody's quantified this, because Congress, when they say to the EPA, make the waters safe, the EPA in Congress don't have a list of every potentially dangerous chemical that could be in the water. The EPA's got to go out. They got to do testing. They don't even know what to test for sometimes. So it could take years to find out that there's triglyceridenzyme or whatever it is in the water, and that causes cancer. There's going to be no ability for our government to function in that way.
Yeah.
Has anybody quantified how many of this could be? And they're just all going to go to Texas, right? And just case after case after case. Supreme Court's going to take one a year, maybe, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem here is, you've got the problem of the Fifth Circuit, which is the super right-wing court that oversees Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, that will, virtually any regulation you bring to them, they're just going to strike it down. And so you're going to have the Fifth Circuit issuing all of these injunctions. You have other judges throughout the country who are better judges than the ones on the Fifth Circuit. And so they will uphold at least some regulations. But what happens when you have a disagreement among federal appeals courts is that the Supreme Court's supposed to resolve it. I think the Supreme Court's really going to regret what they did by overruling Chevron and making the Supreme Court the final word on every regulatory decision that is made in the United States of America, because they don't have the personnel to handle all the questions that are going to come this way. Think about the case where you have a problem where there's some pollutant that may be entering our drinking water that may or may not be unsafe, and the EPA wants to determine whether to ban this thing. Well, how do they do that? first of all, they have a staff of scientists themselves who study it. They go to other research institutions and talk to them and like see what they are learning about this. They may fund some research. They may, they're going to talk to the regulated industries and try to get a sense of, if we do ban this, how much of a burden is this? Like, what is the cost of this regulation that we're going to weigh against the potential benefits of the ban? So that is a job that requires, a whole slew of very specialized employees who have the freedom to talk to whoever they need to talk to in order to come to the right answer. When you aggregate that across all of the problems that the federal government has to deal with, you're talking about tens of thousands of employees throughout the federal government who are all engaged in this information gathering, this deliberative process, this process of making sure that every stakeholder is brought into the conversation. So when a decision finally is made, you have all the information you need to be able to make the right decision. Now the final word is going to rest with the Supreme Court, which has 9 justices and 36 law clerks. And because they're a court, a court isn't allowed to call up third parties and get their opinion on something. It's called an ex parte communication. They're not supposed to do that. And so they don't have the personnel to conduct the inquiry that they're going to need to conduct. They aren't even institutionally allowed to have the conversations they need to have in order to make intelligent decisions. I mean, I think the justices are going to find themselves just with a fire hose of questions that not only do they not know the answer to, but they're going to discover they don't want to be the final word on.
Okay. Well, aside from Harlan Crow maybe bringing other people along on the trip to educate a couple of the justices, on the fishing trip as to some of these questions, what about this scenario? Because it strikes me that the way the court resolves that dilemma goes something like this. There's just like take forever chemicals. EPA says, you can't have this amount of forever chemicals in your water supply, whatever it is. Somebody who's putting out forever chemicals, they go to Texas, they find a court. Court says, no, EPA does not have the authority in this instance. But then the EPA or somebody else brings a case against that same company in the Ninth Circuit, in the EPA, and they find the EPA does have the authority to say these things are illegal. Doesn't the case that comes to the Supreme Court ultimately is one of standing and one of which, or can that, for instance, that corporation, let's say, we're going to buy a PO box in Texas, and we're going to establish our headquarters there for the purposes of regulatory, whatever it is, for regulatory compliance. Isn't it ultimately going to come down to a case where the Supreme Court says, yeah, this is the way that you can escape, that standing can exist in one circuit, and right. That decision holds for you as a company, and you're just going to get some type of everybody's going to go to Texas in the same way that some corporations will go to Delaware to avoid whatever tax it is or registering hassles. There's going to end up being something like that so that the court can avoid all these questions and basically delegate it to some of the right-wing circuits. Right.
So it is trivially easy for any right-wing litigant to get a case in Texas District Court, and specifically in Amarillo, Texas Federal District Court, where they'll get Judge Matthew Kaczmarek who'll do whatever the hell they want. It is trivially easy for any Republican to get any injunction that they want right now. There is still, however, an appeals process. So, as a practical matter, the way this is likely to work is that anyone who doesn't like a regulation will go to Matty Kaczmarek or one of the other judges in Texas who will rubber stamp whatever injunction they want. That will go up to the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit is really bad, but the Fifth Circuit right now is an 8-7 court. It has 8 MAGA judges who are just as nutty as Matty Kaczmarek, and it has 7 judges who range from Democrats to Bush Republicans who sometimes say sensible things. circuits. And so a lot on the Fifth Circuit depends. I mean, you're mathematically more likely to get a crazy panel, but it is possible to get a sane panel in the Fifth Circuit. So maybe you get a sane panel and some of Maddie Kaczmarek's work gets thrown out that way. And then eventually these cases are going to have to make their way up to the Supreme Court. And the question at that point is going to depend, I mean, because these guys haven't shown any capacity to read a statute or to, like, you know, come up with any coherent theory of like what things are and are not allowed by the law, it's going to come down to what Brett and Amy want. But like, I guess where, you know, and this isn't really an optimistic view, but I'm trying to be precise in what I think is going to happen here. Like, I don't think Brett and Amy want someone to be able to dump potassium cyanide into our water supply. Like, I think there is some point where Brett and Amy are going to say, nah, that's too far. I might drink that. It might kill me. I don't want that. But like, they're not going to put the bar where I would put it. They're not going to put the bar where any sensible person would put it. And they're not going to put the bar where, you know, experts who actually know what they're talking about would put it. We're just going to have this arbitrary system where issue after, you know, it takes forever to get a regulation in place because you can get a temporary injunction blocking it for months or years from Maddie Kaczmarek whenever you want. And then eventually the case makes it up to Brett and Amy. And the question is, do Brett and Amy want this regulation to exist?
And that also presumes, of course, that by that point there won't be some third member of the court replacing, let's say, I don't know, Sonia Sotomayor, who is to the right of both of those guys.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not like things are trending in a great way.
Yeah, and that's the other big risk, is that you could see the Fifth Circuitification of the United States, because if Trump gets into power, you know, if Sotomayor, who's, you know, pushing 70, Roberts, who's about the same age, you know, or even Elena Kagan, who right now is 64, if one of them should have to leave the court during Trump's tenure, then he would probably appoint one of these jokers from the Fifth Circuit or a similar judge to replace them. And at some point you have five elitos. You know, at some point you have a Supreme Court where you have five people who are just going to do whatever the Republican Party says.
We have, it feels like we have barely touched upon some of these cases, but I know you've got work to do. And I imagine, but maybe we'll have to reconnect over the course of the summer to talk about things like NetChoice and a couple of the others. It really does. I mean, the Chevron thing, again, we have been, I feel like it's been 6-7 years that we have been talking at least about how that was being cited up, and it is finally done, and it's going to have massive implications, along with the sort of like a couple of the other cases over the past couple of weeks that sort of like nip around the edges of undermining the administrative state. So I think please.
Can I say one thing real quick about NetChoice?
Feel free. Say as much as you want. I want to try and be respectful of your time, because I want to do this again, but. Yes.
Yeah. So NetChoice was a case that was a very normal case where 6 justices agreed that the government is not allowed to tell media companies what they're required to print. You know, that is the most normal First Amendment holding that you could imagine. Like, I mean, I would think it obvious.
This is a case, and just to be clear, this is a case that came out of Texas and Florida, right, where those two state governments wanted to basically say that you need to print more conservative material.
Yeah, they tried to force social media companies to, you know, not ban or moderate or do anything to conservative content. So like Donald Trump couldn't be banned. And the Supreme Court said very sensibly, we have a First Amendment. You cannot order a media company to print something they don't want to print any more than like the federal government could tell the newspapers, like, you're going to run this article and not that article. So like, very normal opinion. Like, anyone who believes in the First Amendment will understand why that decision is correct. But this is why I tend to ascribe the Trump immunity case more to incompetence than to malice, Because like if these guys really were just trying to greenlight a dictatorship, I mean, what has happened in Viktor Orban's Hungary? What has happened in Narendra Modi's India? Like the first thing that the dictator tries to capture is control of the press. And so, like, if these guys were competently moving us to a dictatorship, they wouldn't just have ruled that Trump is immune from prosecution. They would have also ruled, oh, and the Republican Party is allowed to seize control of the press. The fact that they didn't do it just tells me they have no idea what they're doing, no concept of the implications of their decisions, and they are, you know, we are slouching towards Caligula. We are bumbling towards Commodus. You know, and not necessarily, you know, there isn't necessarily anyone at the tiller here.
And I just want to say, for those of you who are excited about living in a fascist authoritarian state, incompetence is actually probably the way that most of them happen, particularly, you know, with various institutions. It is the fumbling and the failure of institutions rather than, I think, like that brings us to these type of places, at least historically, it seems to me, as opposed to a sort of like a massive concerted effort. And again, though, they are sort of like, you know, it's a big bite to take. Maybe we'll get down to a more like a little bending of that First Amendment as time goes on, where, you know, there may be more opportunity for the court to sort of say like, well, you just can't ban if they're talking about, you know, drinking liberal tears or something to that effect. Or
and NetChoice was a 6-3 decision. So like if Trump gets to appoint 2 justices, I guess he gets to control the media as well. So like it's not like everything is safe. But like, well, I'll just close with this thought. Incompetence is how we wind up with a fascist or authoritarian society. And I really hope that in the next few weeks, the Democratic Party shows that it is a competent institution, which, among other things, is capable of coming up with a presidential candidate who can beat Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Well, there's like a lot of stuff happening. The first sitting representative just came out, Lloyd Doggett in Texas, and said Biden has to withdraw. And Pelosi is, I'll read this quote from Pelosi. I think it's a legitimate question to say that, is this an episode or is this a condition? She just said on TV.
Yeah.
Things are moving very quickly right now.
I think it is unreasonable to expect a proud elderly man like Joe Biden to go through all of the stages of grief in a weekend. And so, like, I'm not freaking out that he hasn't made the decision to withdraw yet. Mm-hmm. But, like, he needs to go through the stages of grief pretty quickly here.
I think I am waiting for that first poll to come out.
Well, CNN did just have one in a national poll. Biden's down by 6, just came out an hour ago, and Kamala Harris does better.
Well, there's our answer.
There you go.
Yeah.
Ian, I want to say it's a pleasure.
Thank you for so artfully articulating how our society is crumbling around us. That's yes. It was beautiful.
No, I mean, we got to see America at its peak. Like, I mean, be happy for that.
There you go. Ian, hope to connect with you over the next couple of months to go through some of these other cases. But really appreciate your work as always. And can't encourage people enough to go back and read your last 2 books to get a sense of how exactly we got here and how there was at least, you know, some people who were aware of what the trajectory was. Really appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.